Good evening, and thank you all for attending this talk by Ed Hajim. I'm Lynn Donahue, Director of Career Curricular Initiatives at the Green Center for Career Education and Connections at the University of Rochester, and will be moderating this event. Ed Hajim has over 50 years of experience in the financial industry, most recently as chairman of High Vista Strategies, LLC. Mr. Hajim is the chairman emeritus of the Board of Trustees at the University of Rochester and presently serves on the boards of the Ocean Reef Foundation, Nantucket Golf Club, where he is a founder and lead director, and Nantucket Conservation Foundation and the Horatio Algier Association. In 2015, he received the Horatio Algier Award, an award honoring the achievements of outstanding Americans who have succeeded despite adversity, and to emphasize the importance of higher education. Most recently, Mr. Hajim is the author of The Island of the Four Ps, a modern fable about preparing for your future, preceded by his memoir On the Road Less Traveled, an unlikely journey from the orphanage to the boardroom, which tells of his life experience from childhood to present day. Ed holds a BS in Chemical Engineering from the University of Rochester and an MBA with distinction from Harvard Business School. He and his wife Barbara have been married for 59 years. Together, they have 3 children, Corey, GB, and Brad, and 8 grandchildren. I'm delighted to have Ed with us here tonight, not only as an alum and trustee of the university, but as a supporter of the Green Center and our Designing Your Life course. Both the Green Center and this course center our work around 4 life design principles of get curious, talk to people, try stuff out, and tell your story. His recent book, The Island of the Four Ps, centers around very similar themes of passions, principles, partners, and plans. For the next hour, we'd like to discuss your perspectives, Ed, on these common ideas of embracing curiosity and exploring passions early on in a student's academic journey, building relationships and beginning to test out pathways that align with interests and values, and what to do when things start to get a little off path. We ask students who are currently taking our life design course and reading your book to submit questions. We will be mixing these throughout our discussion as well. We will then leave time at the end for additional questions from the students. Okay, so finding your passions is your first theme in the Island of the Four Ps. So Ed, I'd like to start our discussion around this idea of passions. So how did you find your passions as a student at Rochester? And how did you balance these passions with other factors such as skills, financial goals, etc., in making career decisions?
First, I want to congratulate the students for taking this course. I think very strongly, my crusade at this present time is to solve a problem that I see in university education, which is they make a decent job of teaching you how to make a living. They don't spend enough time on teaching you how to make a life formally. In the old days, we did that in the dormitories and the dining rooms and on the stairs of the library. But I think you're very adventuresome and you're very smart by taking a course early on to really figure out how to design your course, which will allow you to test things earlier. Now, I'll start with passions. I think it's very important. Passion is an overused word. It's a combination, really. You got to spread it out. Talents, interests, likes, dislikes, and your context. Your passions will be different today at the University of Rochester than if you were at the University of Kiev in Ukraine. Totally different. But so you have a big, broad interest that you have. And my contention, what I did at Rochester, of course, was I came in as a chemical engineer because I came from an orphanage, and I wanted to get into an area where I could get a job. In those days, chemical engineers got jobs. Well, I love chemistry as well. But in my sophomore year, I decided that I'd go back to a love or passion I thought I had, which was physics, because I was a physics genius in high school. Well, I took the advanced physics course while the other engineers took the regular engineering physics course. Within 3 or 4 months, I realized I was in the wrong place, but I tested it. And I realized that the physicists were very different kinds of people. They weren't my kind of people. They were very serious. Some were a lot smarter than I was. So I got my D plus and I got out of that. It's very important. In my junior year, a couple things happened to me. First of all, I got fascinated by plant design, big projects. And at that point in time, they were building the St. Lawrence Seaway. So I decided I would test my interest. I hitchhiked up there, got a job in the St. Lawrence Seaway, and I loved it. It was fabulous. Pouring cement from 200 feet, having been on a blasting crew in the afternoon and blowing up stuff and so forth. and going back and looking at the design sounded fascinating. But all of a sudden I looked around and I saw, sure enough, these people live in trailers for 10 years. So my passion was interesting, but the whole getting the idea, the name of something, did it really describe what I was going to do Monday morning over the next 10 years of my life? Also, my junior year, something happened. I decided in a very foolish moment to start a humor magazine because at that point in time, Rochester was a school where fun went to die. I mean, we flunked out about 75% of the engineers over the 4-year period, and we didn't have much fun. So I decided to start a humor magazine against everybody's inclination, the president, the provost, and the head librarian. But I put 30 people together to produce this magazine, and I found out that it was one of my passions was to put people together to solve a problem, put people together to create a product, put people together to start a program. That really excited me. So that sort of leaned me toward business and management. And then inside that, I actually found another passion, which I didn't realize for maybe a decade later, was I really enjoyed helping people do better than they thought they could. And that's one of the techniques in management. If people really believe that you're really interested in them, they'll work much harder and you've got a great chance of being more successful in business. But I didn't learn about that till later on in life. I was in my second job. One of my young associates came up to me and said, Mr. Hajim, you really want me to get ahead, don't you? I said, yes. And then I started to realize that was one of the things that I really enjoyed. And that was sort of a unique passion. You have a passion for chemistry, passion for history, but on the end, this is a passion for something that you do kind of inside yourself. So you have all kinds of different passions. I mean, I did love chemistry. There was no two ways about that. I loved even the smell of the book. And I loved chemical engineering too. But I love much more putting people together and helping them do better than they thought they could. So I think now to sort of sort out your passions, put names on them, find out whether those names tell you the truth. If you're an investment banker, what does an investment banker do Monday morning? What does an analyst do Monday morning? When I got out of school, those were my choices. I chose the analyst because what an analyst did Monday morning was much more interesting than what an investment banker did. And today's world may be different. But at that point in time, you have to find out what you do Monday morning. I'll stop there, Lynn, or I'll go on. I'll get in trouble with my daughter who says I answer every question too long.
That was perfect. You gave a lot of great examples about how you found your passion and the progression of that, and how you balance that, I think, with important things like what is the culture and what would I be doing every day, and then where would I be living? So my
Where am I going to live?
follow-up,
You're right.
yeah, so my follow-up question is, what advice do you have for students when faced with dilemmas like the need to earn money or following social expectations or parents' expectations?
Well, that's what I love. I love Scott Peck's book and his book, The Road Less Traveled. Mine is On the Road Less Traveled. He sold 20 million copies, so I figured I'd piggyback on him. But his third or fourth principle, I think it was the fourth principle, is delayed gratification. I too had to make money. I had made in my mind one of my goals early on was regardless, I was never going to be poor again. So for the first, I would say decade of my business experience, I wanted to make money. And I did basically sacrifice a few of the things that I wanted to do. At age 47, I didn't have all the money in the world, but at that point in time, I was able to pivot back to what I really wanted to do. I was at Lehman Brothers. I was a partner, obviously well paid and had stock and all the rest of the stuff. I'd made enough money to satisfy 3 children. They were all private schools, but I figured I had it all done. I could quit, and I got actually pushed out. You're reading the book. I got pushed out into my dream job, which was to run a company. I had basically run divisions and organizations, but I never run a whole company. And I got a chance to leave a very fancy place where it was one of the great dining rooms of all times, and my office overlooked the whole harbor. And I shifted to a little firm called Firm and Sells, where my office overlooked the brick wall, and the dining room was 2 hot plates in the conference room. And we had 80 people. We had a tenth of the revenues that I had when I was running the division at Lehman Brothers. But my passion was to run something, and I could basically put my passion into place. I could exercise my principles. I could pick my partners, and I could make plans and carry them out. So, in a sense, you have a dilemma. You'll have to there'll be a fork in the road. You may say, I can't do this for a while. I give you another example. I realized I was going to go into business. One thing I really disliked was accounting, but I had to do it. And so I took a couple of very difficult courses in accounting, especially financial accounting. And I got to the point where I got over the hump of disliking it and understanding it and liking it. But I knew I had to do it, but I really didn't want to. But that was part of the requirement. It was like in the old days when you went to a country, you had to learn the language, and not so much today. But that's one of the things that I found. But I didn't want to be an international business. I wanted to be an international businessman. But in the old days, if you were going to be an international businessman, you had to really speak the language. I mean, well. And these are the kinds of things. So the dilemma is when your parents. Now, I think what's nice about your course, your wonderful courses, you can design 2 or 3 paths. Take the path your parent want. Your parents are smart and they've been there, done that. They lived in a different era than you did. But you take that path, see how it feels. Take the path, that your professor wants, and then maybe take a path that you think you'd like to do. I think that's wonderful, designing 3 things. Put those hats on, test them out. Find out what actually you would do Monday morning and 5 years from now, in each one of those jobs. I love the Navy. I was a naval officer for 3 years, and by the end of my 3-year period, I qualified as what they call a command duty officer, and that meant that when the captain went ashore, 1 out of 4 days, I was the captain of a ship that was 440 tons and 400 people and so forth. I was the captain. I loved the service, but I realized that to be a true captain would take me another 20 or 25 years, and I was not going to do that. I was not going to spend 25 years doing that. No, it's my impatience. I learned about myself. That's one of the things like this course will do for you. It'll teach you who you really are. And each one of us is unique. We have certain characteristics. You have probably a patient quotient better than mine. I'm a somewhat impatient person, and I have maybe a shorter span of attention that I have to have. Each one of those things that I learned about myself allowed me to eliminate or pick certain fields. And just to use an example, I really want to be a venture capitalist because that really excited me. But as I got into it, I found out the patience required, the patient quotient. You invest in something and 10 years later, it matures, or in the fact you will lose 7 or 8 of the things you're going to invest in will go under. I was not good at losing things either. I would stay with something too long. So venture capital turned out not to be the thing for me. So those are the things that I think are very important. And you will have dilemmas. By the way, what we're trying to do here is to give you a framework, a vocabulary that you'll have in your stomach, that when you get that dilemma, you'll take it out and say, this is the reason I'm going in this direction. And by the way, I'm going to go in this direction for a period of time, or maybe forever if it's the right direction. I'm going to go in this direction for a period of time. I'm going to learn accounting. I'm going to take this job in order to learn what I really want to do someday. And that's then you see, when you're on your way, you'll feel more comfortable about it because I'm doing this for a reason, because here's my goal out here. I wanted to run a company, and I was in sales, I was in trading, I was an analyst. By the time I got to be the CEO of the company, I had basically done all the things that everybody had done, and I was still 47 years old, and I could take over a company, and I could do what I really wanted to do. And I think that's with everything you're going to do in life. Musicians know this better than anything. Athletes know this better than anything. I remember when I was a basketball player, it took me an entire season to learn how to make a layup with my right hand because I was left-handed. But I would go out on the basketball court and I would do 100 right-hand layups so that I could go both sides of the course. And that's what you're going to have to do in life. And I think that's what these dilemmas you come up with. They really aren't dilemmas. They're just the bumps in the road that are normal.
Well, you talked a lot about some of those forks in the road, and then you started talking about kind of the barriers that can come up. And before I go on to the next question, I also wanted to mention that the skills that students are learning, we talk in the class about how they are lifelong skills. And so I loved how you brought that up, that students will always revisit that understanding of themselves and some of the skills they learn here in the class as well as at the U of R. So
so important to know who you are.
Yes.
When you react to certain things, you learn about. I remember back in my freshman year, I learned the kind of weaknesses and strengths I have. And by the way, that's why I think it's most important. You don't really know who you are because you were controlled by your genes and by your environment. It's the first time when you're a freshman, sophomore in university, you say, these are the traits I want to keep. These are the traits maybe I want to cut back or even eliminate, and these are the traits I want to add. And you can start doing that.
Yep. Yeah. As students begin to test out these curiosities and develop this path forward, though, things may not always go as planned. And so you do recommend embracing failure and owning your mistakes. For many students here, they got into U of R because they have excelled in the classroom, out of the classroom, and failure is not always something they're comfortable with or had a lot of experience with. So I'm wondering, how did you overcome challenges in your life, like in childhood and then later in life when things didn't always go as you had hoped for?
Well, I want to give you a cliche you should carry for the rest of your life. First of all, in your stage of life, early failure is a gift. You've heard this over and over again. You learn much more from your failures than from your successes. And I truly believe you ought to build into the conversation with yourself is there's only two experiences you're going to have in everything you've ever tackled. One is success, the other is a learning experience. My middle son laid that on me hard. He said, Dad, there's no such thing as failure at my stage of life because he said, I learn from when I fail. And, there's all kinds of stories where Lincoln only won one election, and that was for president. He kept failing and failing and failing. And if you look at any of the great success, they always fail enough. But what I did basically is, I had a goal that I really wanted to have a life. And, it was because I didn't have a life as a child. So I had, I always say these disadvantages that I had actually turned into advantages because it drove me. I knew I wanted to be successful because I wasn't going to live the life that I had as an orphan and as a foster child. So now each one of us is going to have certain drivers, and some of the drivers are not great enough. You don't want to drive that hard. Each life is a sort of, it's not a balance. It's a harmony between different things. I think you may not want to work as hard. You may want to have more time with your family. You may want to spend more time in an avocation. If I was to do it over again, I might like to learn to play the piano, but I didn't have time for that. So in a sense, I overcame it. Well, you always, again, looking back and see what made you. What made me was, first of all, my father, who abandoned me 4 times before I was 15 years old, gave me the one thing that everybody needs, is unconditional love. My father loved me more than anything else, and he kept telling me how great I was, even though I wasn't so great. If you read my book, you'll find out when I was 10 years old, I wrote him a letter because I got tired of him saying how great I was. But Dad, I'm not such a good kid. Sometimes I'm a bad boy too. So, but the second thing was the nuns at the Catholic school. They made it very clear to me that if I did the right thing, I'd end up in the right place, but the wrong thing, end up in the other place, which was not such a good place. And as a 6 and 7 and 8-year-old, that was embedded in me, that if I did well, I would end up okay. So, those are the beliefs you have. Later on in life, I realized probably wasn't 100% true because I could really do all the right things and still end up not doing well. And the third thing was, in my era, when you went to the movies on Saturday afternoon, there were heroes on the screen. They always did the right thing. And by the way, those are the answers I've come up with after a couple of years of having people ask the question. I didn't have those answers 5 or 6 years ago. I couldn't really even tell. I had some of them to some extent, but I started to realize that I had to define what made me do what I did. But most importantly, I think for you all, is to have this vocabulary. And every time you come to that bump in the road or you come to that dilemma or that difficulty, take it out and look at it and write it down, by the way. I have yellow pads. I have piles of yellow pads when I came to difficult, and I've had quite a number of difficult circumstances. As you'll read my book, I blew up a company when I was in my early 30s because I caught a disease called hubris. Hubris was terminal. I believed I could do anything, and I realized I tried to do it and it didn't work. So I failed when I was in my mid-30s. Was the best thing that ever happened to me.
So, I'd like to talk more about the third P in your book. We can switch gears just a bit. People and partners. And I know you talk about that quite a bit. Students often feel apprehensive about connecting with people who can serve as a mentor. So just want to ask you for your experience first. How did you face your fears when developing professional relationships and finding mentors and your partners, and how did they help you? And then following that, like what kind of advice do you give for students on how to make those connections?
Well, first of all, the most important partner is to find, partner one, P1, as I call it in the book. I mean, finding someone that you can spend the rest of your life with, you can share your life with, somebody who you can support and we'll support you. Barbara, we've been married, by the way, for 60 years now, passed over the summer. 60 years, and she's involved in every decision we've ever made. And she has certain talents that I don't have, and she makes better decisions in those areas. We work together on everything we do. So finding someone you can love is still the most important partner you can possibly have, and the one that really that lasts a lifetime. Then, but other partners, when I get involved in business or in eleemosynary operations, I try to find three kinds of partners. One partner in today's world, partners who can do things I can't do. I can't set up a call like this. I need a technician. I need people who can do things I can't do. I also want to find people who can do things better than I can do. And I had the luxury, and I think it's a luxury, I wanted to find people who can do things I do really well that I don't want to do. So you find those three kinds of partners in life, you really have nirvana. And I happened to come across a young man when early on in my career, 6'5" Dartmouth graduate, who do all three of those things. And we spent 35 years together at Lehman Brothers, at Furman Cells, and later on at a small firm that he was involved with. So, and he did everything for me. He did all the things I didn't want to do. When the SEC came in, or the NASD came in, or some other ugly situation, or he handled HR, he handled IT. And I did the things I wanted to do, which I did best. So finding those partners. Now, the other thing is that you should find a mentor if you can. That's very important. Even, I was very sophisticated Wall Street guy, CEO of the firm, but I had Wally. Wally was 10 years older than I was, and he'd been there, done that. He traveled the same road I was traveling. And so whenever I had to make a major decision, I'd call up old Wally. Wally was a senior guy at Drexel, then he was a senior guy at Capital Research. And Wally had good sense, and he would put up with my questions. And all through my life, I collected people who would help me get done. When I was a young man in Wall Street, I was there in the 60s. And the early 70s, I got very uncomfortable with the world. It seemed like the world was going to come to an end. And the young fellow introduced me to these were two German economists at Low Broads. They used to say, the world's coming to an end, here are the reasons, And they were right, by the way, because the world almost came to an end in 1974. They helped me get through that market. I got very bearish, and I was right, and it worked out just fine. So, and it gave me a bunch of principles that I could use during difficult markets. So finding a mentor is very important. Finding someone, just someone who's been there, done that 10 years ahead of you, and then maybe someone even who's been there longer. And you cultivate them. Don't be afraid to call that person up and bother them. And if they don't want to do it, then you find someone else. The other thing is I also find a friend. At Rochester, I found a true friend. I mean, I always say, look to the left, look to the right, find a friend that you want to spend the rest of your life with. And again, word cultivate's a bad word, but just keep track of that friend. His friend's name was Richard. And, when I didn't have any place to go because I had no family, he took me home at Christmas time. We were naval officers together. We met each other in the Far East. And because he was from a very fine family, he didn't have to go to work after he left the Navy. He went to Harvard Business School. I went to work because I said I had no money. I had to go to work. But he was relentless. You have to come to the Harvard Business School. I said, Dick, I don't have the money. I don't have the grades. He says, you have to come here. And of course, I did go there, and it changed my life completely. It was all due to him. But we actually worked at the same company. And unfortunately, about 10 or 15 years ago, he got terminal disease. And I would call him up, kind of like Tuesday at Maury's. I'd call him up and talk to him almost once a week. And when I get on the phone, the first question out of his mouth was, how are you? Here was a guy who had a terminal disease asking about me, my children. Was I working too hard? He was a true friend. So, because we spent time together. I mean, I was in his wedding. I dealt with him when he had trouble with his kids and so forth, so forth. So find a friend. I think partners almost could be the first P instead of the third P. But I find it's one of the most important things you can do. But finding that number one person and committed to that person. And there's a lot of partner expressions requirements of that. And I can go into that if you'd like about P1
Yeah,
because
I think yeah, students can get pretty nervous of doing that initial outreach, especially if there's somebody that are new to them. So I'm wondering what kind of advice you have for helping students face their fears and what kind of characteristics should they look for in a mentor? And if you want to talk about what you looked for, you can talk about that too.
Never be afraid, because they put their pants on one leg at a time, or their skirt on one leg at a time. It's people. If you're interested in someone, I'm at the Harvard Business School. We would accost some of the speakers, the biggest guys and gals in the world. We say, "Can we drive you to the airport?" And then occasionally we would develop a relationship with that person, or write someone a letter, and say, "I really want to get to know you." I have a young lady who's a Harvard Business School graduate up in Nantucket, and she basically contacts me once a month, tells me what she's doing, because first of all, she gets a chance to write down what she's doing, and she has a decision to make, and sometimes I help her, sometimes I don't. What I look for a mentor is a couple of things. First of all, the person has to be interested in me, interested in doing it. And don't be afraid to be turned down a couple of times. So what? There's somebody out there that is interested in you. That's the most important thing, really. Someone who's really interested. But I think second, right up behind it, is someone who's doing something that you're going to do. Been there, done that. No, I've just gone through it. They can save you a lot of difficulties if they can tell you what lies ahead of you. They can also describe things that you don't quite understand and maybe shorten your decision-making process. But I would seek mentors out all the time. Now, I had a mentor at the University of Rochester. His name was Oscar Miner. He was the mechanical drawing professor who got me through. I couldn't draw a straight line with a ruler. He got me through there, and he mentored me all through the school. I became the finance board chairman. He was the faculty advisor. He mentored me there. And in my senior year, the same thing, when I decided the kind of courses I was going to take, he basically was there. So having a mentor, I think, is don't be embarrassed. And you can have a mentor who's just slightly older than you, or you can have an old guy like me, depending upon how you get along. But most important thing, besides someone who's really interested, is to try to get someone who's going in a direction that you are going to go, so that you can basically look at the road you're going to travel. And that'll save you a little bit of time and energy.
Thank you. That's such valuable advice for students. I just wanted to tell students that in about 15 minutes, we're going to take your questions. So you can go ahead and enter questions in the chat if you would like. So a number of students were really interested in what inspired you to write your book, The Island of the Four Ps. And in that, you write about the lessons that you've learned in life. So how does the book convey those lessons that you learned, and kind of what's inspired you to write it?
Well, what inspired me to write it was that I was it was the first book that I wrote. First of all, I found in my lifetime, fables helped me enormously. Fables basically trap you into doing your own thinking. So I wanted to write a fable. I mean, go back to the Bible, Aesop's fables, but things like Who Moved My Cheese, the Celestine prophecies. Those they crystallized. And I was somewhat dyslexic, so I had to read short books. You'll find that fables are relatively short books. They're communicating ideas in a very non-teachy way. They just could just absorb them. You start thinking about your situation when you're reading a fable. So I started to write a fable, and I went back and looked at how I made decisions. What allowed me to make certain kinds of decisions. And I found out these 4 Ps kept coming up. I kept saying, this is something I really want to do. I didn't use the word passion, but something I really want to do. It was my passion, actually. And here are my principles. These are the rules that I want to follow, and these are the lines I won't cross. These are the kind of partners I want to have in order to get them. And I knew that Harvard Business School taught me you must write down your plans and look at them. And then, of course, in many respects, I learned early on because I learned the most important thing in investing is themes. I try to find places where I would get the wind at my back. So I said, let's put this all together. And then I came up with the concept that when you're 18 years old and you leave home, in my book, The Navigator and the Captain, Mom and Dad drop you off at an island. For the first time, you have a chance to decide what your passions are, establish your principles, pick your partners, and write your plans by yourself. You're out first time ever. You're really left, and that ceremony we have at Rochester where the parents leave with the candle night, that tells the story. And you got a chance. And 4 years go very quickly. That's why I wanted to start this in the freshman or sophomore year, so you'd have a chance to test a bunch of these different experiences. Because passion is a very overused word, very difficult to come up with at early stages. In fact, most young people say, I don't know what my passions are. Well, let's dig in. Ask, what do you really like to do? What makes you take two steps at a time? What do you do that where time passes quickly and so forth? And you got to develop. You basically got to separate passions from avocations and fun. I mean, I guess you'd like to play the banjo or maybe a basketball player. I really wanted to be a baseball player, and I was good in high school. And I played freshman year at Rochester, and I realized that it wasn't going to be. So I converted that into intramural sports. So, but I think that's important to recognize that these are the kinds of things that, and I had these yellow pads, and these things kept coming up. I kept weighting them. How much, if I, and again, you early on, the question was, suppose you get to a dilemma where you have to make money. Well, that became, part of my drive. My passion was to make money, but to do this particular kind of work. Now, I had to decide which was more important at a point in time. Now, it was easy for me because Wall Street, when I got out of business school, was paying $6,000 a year. And these people out in California running something called a mutual fund were paying $11,000 a year. The people out in California were letting me really do something in 3 months, and the people in New York were not going to let me do anything for 3 or 4 years. So I had an easy decision, but I had principle. My principle was freedom. I really wanted to be free to do what I didn't want to be under somebody's thumb all the time. So I wrote that down. And this company in California said, you'll be out of here in 3 months. Well, that was great. Briefcase on an airplane. Here I was going to work for some very probably smart, intelligent guy, but I was going to be under his thumb for following him around for 4 years. So, and then also I was a Californian, so that was kind of interesting too. I really I like the weather better than New York, in fact. So you start to check off the list, but you got to get on a piece of paper, and write down the positives and negatives in each one of them. But that's why I wrote the book. I wrote the book. The second part of the book, my wife, and my children started to say, we don't know the whole story. We want you to write that down. And obviously, Rochester put pressure on me. I wanted to give my gift anonymously because I was a private person. They said, no, if you're going to do this gift, you're going to be chairman of the board, got to know more about you. All of a sudden, it kind of came. And then Horatio Alger said, no, if you want to join Horatio Alger, we're going to get a big picture of you, and you're going to tell your whole story to the world. So I figured it was time. And then once I started to write it, I started to find out, even at my late stage of my life, I started to find a lot of interesting things about myself that I didn't know. And it was very important. Although my childhood was almost impossible to write, my daughter actually wrote the first draft because I couldn't do it because I'd buried it for 55, 60 years. And once you bury something like that, it's hard to bring it back up again. I used to well up horribly when I talked about it because I never really solved those problems back then. That's another thing that I would tell about that landing on the island is you can make the decision. You can take your background, which mine wasn't great, and bury it and tell people nothing about it. I think a little bit of what I call, denial is not bad if you're that kind of person, or you can let it hang out. Say, mother was a drug addict, my father was a criminal, they spent their life in prison. That's each person's got his own way of doing it. But what's exciting about the course you're taking is you're going to be able to make those decisions and recognize the consequences because you're going to get it out in the open formally, and that's kind of important. The fact is, I think that when you tell each other your own stories, I think you're going to find out some really interesting crossovers and some things you're going to find that you're not alone in the world.
I'm trying to think. I have time for one more question for you. I am interested because we didn't talk a lot about principles, and this, I know that you have spent quite a bit of time thinking about making a positive social impact. What would you say to people who might balk at this idea, especially in cultures where profitable careers are the priority or when students need to make money in order to support their family back home?
Well, that's in the book. You'll find in the principles section, we go through the 4 parts of life: self, family, work, and community. And it's my contention that unless you harmonize, it's not balance because you're always out of balance. Recognize that. People say, on a balanced life. No. When you're working, you're focused on work. Yourself, your family, and your community may not take as much energy because you have to spend time on your family. You get a sick child, you'll spend more time on that. Right now, you're spending a lot more time on self than anything else. And I take the word community, which is giving back. That's the greatest satisfaction of all. And if you don't do that, I don't think you'll fulfill all of your personal goals. You'll never really feel terrific about yourself. And I take that because I must admit at the University of Rochester, it added so much to my life that that I was able to do something for education, do something for a bunch of young people. And I had a scholarship student who was now a PhD, and she stood up on a stage and she said, "If it wasn't for you, Mr. Hajim, I wouldn't be here." That's enough. That takes care of anything I've ever done in my life. And I now have 200 or 300 or 400 of these kids. And I have a system up in Nantucket where we're putting 25 kids into college every year from the Gulf and so forth. So if you want to have a balanced life, it's got to be self, family, work, and community. Community is just as important as anything else. And in my life now, given my age and my situation, I can spend a lot more energy on community. I don't have to spend too much time on self, except keeping the old body in shape. But my work is significantly, I don't have to focus on that at all. I've got a few consulting contracts. That's not family. They're all grown now. You got to pay attention to them. They're important, but they've got their own lives to live. So now I can spend much more time on community. Some people, God bless them, start early in their life, take a chunk of their time and spend it on community. Again, that's an individual decision. That's what I say. This course is wonderful. You may say to yourself, "Hey, Jim, he waited, until he was older until he got really involved." Well, every year I want to go to my church, go to an orphanage, go to a food station and so forth. And that's what I want to do early in life. I want to spend 10, 15% of my time doing that. And then that will morph into something. I chose education early on, got involved in my kids' schools, and that really satisfied my contribution. But I think if you don't make a contribution, you'll find out life will not be completely full.
Thank you for sharing that. Before we turn it over to the students' questions, I did want to end with, are there any additional lessons that you learned during the journey that you haven't talked about yet that you think would be helpful to these students?
Well, I'm writing this third book, and I just come up with 3 mantras that I would have every student carry around with him. They're a little bit cliches, but if you carry them around with you, you keep saying it over and over again, they'll say something to you. First of all, anything is possible. And I'm living proof of that. And a lot of people are living proof of that. Anything is possible. You can do anything you want to do if you put your mind to it. You may have some bumps. It may take a while. I wandered along for almost 20 years before I found, something I really wanted, that really made me happy, which was to run a company. Second is education is the solution. And George Eastman said this he said almost everything. I think it's everything. You in this room, most of you will live to over 100. You're going to have to pivot a number of times in your life. Education is going to be a lifelong experience. I guarantee that a great number of you may have to go back to school full time sometime in your life. A whole new experience, going back full time to learn something in order to compete, in order to do what you want to do. And of course, if you decide sometime in your life that you really want to play the piano, you may have to go back to school to do that. But education is a solution to everything. Now, the third thing I carry around with me, which maybe the secret to my success, was never be a victim. One of the problems of being a victim, you use energy in the wrong direction. The biggest problem when you come up with a problem, you're a victim of something, whether it's your fault or somebody else's fault. And I give you 2 examples in my life. First time was my fault. The second time, I did everything right, and I still got booted out of Lehman Brothers. Focus on what's next. That takes a lot of energy too, but that's really all that counts. Using that energy to hate something, to fight somebody. For example, Lehman Brothers, I spent 7 years there. I turned 2 divisions around. The last division, I raised $7.5 billion in 2.5 years. And they still, because the boss and I didn't get along, pushed me out. All right? Instead of fighting them, I was a chairman of 6 outside boards. I could have gone to those boards. I said, Lou, I earned a little and learned a little. I got left and I found my dream job because I focused on what's next. It was a godsend to get me out of there because these weren't nice people. They weren't my people. But I suffered there for 7 years because I had to make money, and I had kids in college, kids in school and so forth, and I couldn't really go anyplace. I was committed. But when that came in time, I focused on what's next. And even now, God bless me, I'm so lucky, is that my work is coming to an end. I can't run a company anymore because I can't be there at 7 o'clock in the morning, but I can run a golf course and I can run this course that I'm involved with. So the next thing, what's next for me is hopefully to spread this course through as many schools as I can, because it gives me an enormous amount of satisfaction to see young people, get some of the answers earlier. Not all the answers. You're not going to get all the answers because the game's going to change. This inner voice you have, really in many ways, like the last message I want to give you is, people say, what are the two constants, death and taxes? Not true. Death happens once. Taxes, some people don't even pay. Two constants are your inner voice, from the day you're born to the day you die. That's where you make most of your decisions, and change. And the game we're trying to do here at the course that Lynn and others are teaching is to get that inner voice, a vocabulary, a framework that can handle the change that you're going to have to deal with.
Thank you, Ed. You've been so generous with your stories and your lessons for the students. So much valuable input to take from this. I want to now turn it over to the students. Students, I know that you all have thought of questions in your head and submitted some of them, and some of them have been integrated into the questions that I've asked Ed. But I would love to hear from you what questions you have. And I don't have any in the chat. So I'm going to just ask for you to be brave, and you can put them in the chat. You can speak them out loud. Feel free to raise the hand tool or to show your video and just ask outright. Any question is a good question.
There's no bad questions.
No bad questions. I have a question here. When did you develop an idea of who your very first employer out of college would be? Should be.
Well, that's I got out of the Navy in 1961, and it wasn't a good year for hiring. So I applied to the University of California, Berkeley Business School, and I got in. But since I'd spent 4 years at Rochester being my brains out, being an engineer, and I'd spent 3 years in the Navy as an engineer, I had to find out what this engineering stuff was. So I sent out 40 letters. I really wanted to get a job in San Francisco because I had a girlfriend there, but there was no jobs in San Francisco. I would work for any company, but nobody was hiring, and nobody was hiring me. I sent the 40 letters out, and I got 2 returns. One was to be an assistant plant manager in Lexington, Kentucky. And the second one was to be an applications research engineer in a brand new field called plastics. This was 5 years before Dustin Hoffman, by the way. And it was in Wilmington, Delaware, which was, close to Washington and Philadelphia and New York, which seemed to me more of a cosmopolitan area. Having spent my, time in Los Angeles, I was convinced I wanted a city. So I took the job at Hercules in applications research because it was a new field. By that time, I had gotten to the point that I really wanted to be in something that was new and growing. And at that time, plastics was brand new. In fact, it was the 2 products which I worked on were Hyfax and Profax, which became polyethylene and polypropylene. They didn't have even names when I got there. So that's what I did. And I think the same thing here. In seeking out a job, you have a real unique experience when you're a senior at college or you graduate business school. You get a chance to interview. And if there's one lie that I allow everybody to tell, it's the top line in your resume. That's the job description that you want. The job description you want when you interview someone should be the job that they want to give you. In other words, don't be afraid to write down, because what that does, it focuses the interviewee and the interviewer, both of you. And that way you can figure out whether or not you really want to do it. If you write down, this is the job that I want, and you go on the interview and try to get the job, you may find out that, yes, that's a great job and I want to take it. You may find it's not for you. I think a perfect example is when I graduated Rochester Economic Business School. I was really wanted to be in finances, but I figured I'd take a couple of engineering type jobs. So I interviewed Exxon, and I went there, and the guy took one look at me and said, "You're not for us. You're basically you haven't got the patience. You don't have you can't stay with saying long enough." Looked at my resume and so all the different things that I'd done in college and so forth. And I wrote said I really wanted Exxon, and it was an oil trading business. And 2 hours later, he hired me. He said, "Oh, I changed my mind. I'll hire you." I walked out in the street and I realized that I worked hard enough to get that job that I really didn't want it. But I would never have known that unless I really put that hat on and tried to get the job. I wouldn't have known that because I realized I worked so hard and made so many statements that weren't actually 100% true. But I wanted to get the job to convince how to do it. So I think that's now you don't have to go to the interview for that if you don't want to. But I think one of the privileges you have is interviewing the whole span of things. You may find a person you really like or a situation which you didn't realize was even better than you thought. By the way, the Exxon job, for a while during that interview, I thought I really wanted that job because he described it and it sounded fascinating. Traveling all over the world, trade oil in different places and so forth. That sounded great to me. But then I realized large company, a lot of people, so on and so forth, wasn't for me.
We have a number of other questions. So
Good question.
what would you recommend to young U of R finance students who want to follow a very similar path as you in the world of finance? What should we focus on or prepare for in the investment world?
Well, it's a very different investment world today. Just give you a feeling, you're all good at numbers. When I went to Lehman, by the way, when I went to Hutton, it was the best firm on the street, and they did only retail. Again, what I try to do, and I recommend you do this, is find something new that people are doing. I basically took over the institutional business, which was a disaster at Hutton. They tried for years. They little tiny business. This thing was a multi-$100 million company, and the institutional business was like $5 or $6 million. I took over as head of the institutional business. But when I went to Lehman Brothers 7 years later, 3 years later, Lehman Brothers capital was 24 million. These were very different. Lehman Brothers didn't even interview at the business school. Goldman Sachs only took 2 people. In fact, Capital Research only took 2 people in those days. Now they take hundreds. So it's a different experience. So I would say, in my mind today, to find some niche areas in finance that you're interested in, or go to work for JP Morgan in one of these situations where they give you a look at everything. Maybe you'll find something there. But as soon as possible in finance, get off into some kind of a niche today. Derivative trading, crypto, emerging markets. Unless you like big companies and big responsibilities. I mean, again, that's why I say to people, if you have something I didn't have. You could go to work with a firm within 5 years, be managing hundreds of billions of dollars at Citibank in bonds and munis or whatever they're doing, or you could run a big division someplace. That's nothing I didn't want to do because that required certain kinds of responsibilities that I didn't want. But if I were to say, what would I do? I would go to work if I couldn't get a job in an interesting company in an interesting area. I'd go to work for a big firm that would train me in different areas, but I'd continue to look for what's new, what's next. What can I really get involved with that's really interesting, that's different. For example, if you got involved in crypto 10 years ago, you wouldn't have to worry about ever having a job again. It's up, or in the case of precious metals, in 2000, gold was $2,000 an ounce. Today it's $4,500 an ounce. So if you're involved in metals trading, but one of my most successful friends got into the oil business at Salomon Brothers when oil was like a few bucks a barrel, and it went to 40. So he had the wind at his back, and also it was a new area. They didn't trade oil in those days. It was way back. The oil trading was really done inside companies, not on Wall Street. So find something that's really, first of all, you have to be interested in. If you find a theme that's not your thing, don't get anywhere near it. But if you find something interesting to you that's new, that's what I would try to seek out. Sort through those different kinds of things. And private equity was great, 20 years ago. Today, I wouldn't recommend it. Everybody thinks that's exciting and so forth. But private equity for companies, let's say under 20 million EBITDA, that's still an interesting area. A friend of mine runs a firm of that for the last 20 years. Just absolute ball. There's lots of little companies out there that you can go out and help. Now, you're not going to get as rich as you go to work for, KKR and get involved in what they're doing, because this guy, runs a $200 million fund, but he has 5 or 6 companies which he goes to on a regular basis. He's got 20 people in the company, and he loves what he's doing, and he makes a lot of money because he'd be a little firm. I came across him because when I was president of the Alumni Association at Harvard Business School, he came up to me and said, I want your name and $50,000. I'm starting a small private equity firm. And I said to him, Brett, come back in 5 years. It was a 3-day conference. He wouldn't leave me alone. So I said, here's 50,000, leave me alone. He said, can I put your name in the prospectus? I said, I guess so. 18 months later, he came back and gave me 20 times my money. So I paid attention to them, and I've been with them ever since. So that's a niche area. Small private equity is a niche area, or small private equity in a particular arena. Down here in North Ocean Reef, we do a lot of investing in ships. And that's an interesting area. People don't understand that arena. That's interesting.
Can you, yeah, can you talk a little bit more about the ethics of business? A student has asked about that. I think that relates back to principles.
The aspects of business. Well,
The
principles.
ethics of business.
Well, that's one of the things you really have to work on hard in finance, especially, is you've got to really draw the lines early on, and the lines you won't cross, and the rules you're going to follow. Because honestly, on a regular basis, there'll be that moment in time you'll get that call that's illegitimate, and you got to draw that line right away. And all through your life, by the way, you have these principles that you keep. Like I had a principle: I wanted a family, I want to be successful in business, so I chose not to be a public person. To live happy was to live hidden. Don't go in the press. That requires energy. Don't go on television. That requires energy. Don't go in magazines. Spend that time working on the company. Even then, divide your company time. Make sure there are people in the company that do things like handle clients. Otherwise, you'll work the full day as the managing partner and go out and night with clients. I didn't do that. You have to make choices. And by the way, in 20 years as being managing partner, I paid myself the most 1 year because I wanted other people to take those clients out at night and have them make those big deals, because I wouldn't do that. I was running the company. My job was people and businesses, not clients. And so you have to draw those lines. The ethics are very important because you only have reputation. It only lasts once. And it really is very important. And if you're smart enough, you work hard enough, you'll be comfortable enough. You don't have to hurry. In fact, I credit more of my success with getting rich slowly, because if you get rich too quickly, some things happen, they're not good. So there's no hurry. There's really no hurry in your lifetime. Take your time, do what you think is best, but in many respects, have those lines and have those rules that these are things you're not going to do. And it's not necessarily just stealing. It's someone who calls you up and says, I just talked to the president and he said he's going to do this tomorrow morning. And, what you could do to make lots of money, don't do it. And it's very important. Or if you find someone in your company doing something wrong and you really feel, you have to report it. It's very important. I think, and those are the kinds of things that over a lifetime, will benefit you. I think.
Yeah.
I find that, especially in finance, where if you're in other arenas, you don't come across that kind of thing very often. But in finance, but in the other thing is, if you do that, what happens over a period of time, people start to emulate you, especially if you're in a management position. And I learned that from the service. Being a naval officer was a great experience because everything I did was watched. But in my particular, I had a division of 150, I had 100 men, 200 eyeballs. Where your shoes shine. When you went ashore, did you do the right things or the wrong things? Did you drink too much? Did you swear? It's very important. And what happened after a while, these rules and these lines become habits. It becomes very easy. You just get used to doing it. But at the beginning, it's not easy because you're out in this new world. You see these things coming at you, and it's not easy.
So I think I have time just for one more question. I'm going to kind of combine two into one. A student asked, because you talked about setbacks and challenges in your career, a student asking about a setback you encountered while in college at U of R and steps you took to overcome that setback. And one of the instructors is also asking about building relationships when you're an international student. So I think we have many international students, as you know, at U of R. And so sometimes applying these principles in a new culture, including building relationships or other elements, creates setbacks. First part is, what kind of setback did you experience? How did you overcome it? And what advice do you have, especially for international students who have setbacks regarding developing those mentors or relationships?
Two different questions. Very simple one for me. Picture 5'7" young man uh, in the black leather jacket with a suitcase with the wrong clothes. Arrives at the university, and the first week is rush week in those days. Fraternities were very important. So he went out with rush without the social graces, without the clothes, without any manners and so forth. And you were rejected by all of the fraternities, all of them, every one of them. Even the deeks rejected me. So what do? You put your head down. And of course, it was easy for me because, the food was better than the orphanage food. And I only had one roommate instead of a bunch of roommates, so that was okay too. And so I put my head down. I became I played basketball, freshman baseball. I quarterbacked the dorm football team. We were, I think, 1-8 or something like that. We won one game, but I was there. I put my head down, became a good student. I got into the sophomore honorary society, and sure enough, at the beginning of my sophomore year, I got pledged by most of the fraternities on campus. That was you got to take on what they wanted. So I got a haircut. I bought a tweed jacket. I mean, I realized there were certain requirements, from a visual point of view. I got a crew cut, and I got this tweed jacket I bought downtown, and also I developed, because of my sports activities. A lot of the guys that I came in contact with were fraternity guys. And so they said, this guy's a reasonable athlete, and we'd like to have you in the fraternity. They got to know me. I wasn't what they thought I was. As far as international students come in today, it's a lot easier today than it ever was. But I think here again, international students, if they want to they want to go to their own country, then they have to find out the cultures of the countries. And you all international students know that those cultures are so different. And they also have changed significantly. Reason I didn't go into international business is that in 1964, when I went over 63, when I went to work for a company in Belgium, I realized, it was all family stuff. If you weren't part of the family, you're out of there. You had to speak both Flemish and French, which was very difficult. And the businesses were very small and very, very, very frozen. You couldn't do anything. I tried to get them to do certain things. Now, we've done this for 100 years, and you don't understand. So I didn't do that. But for international students, I think the key there is, again, mentorship. Find some U.S. person or U.S. person who came from your country, who's now become a U.S. citizen, is involved in business. I think, pardon the expression, the Indian students are very lucky, because there are a lot of these so-called Indians who actually are Americans today completely. They're CEOs of companies, they're heads of divisions, and so forth. Find that kind of mentor and ask what he or she has done to integrate. It's not easy. That's not easy. Foreign students have a little more difficult problem. The same thing that a U.S. student would have in a foreign country. A perfect example: one of my girlfriend's daughters went to the University of Manchester and had a hell of a time getting a job over there, even though she was a very good student. So I think it's a little more difficult, but I would try to find someone from your country that has basically converted into the American way of life, is involved in a company here, and you have to seek them out. And if I was, let's say, from Nigeria, and I got a letter from a senior at University of Rochester saying, I'm a chemical engineer. I lived in such town in Nigeria. You come here 20 years ago. You've done real work on this guy or gal. I know you've been successful. I really would like some of your time. I'm willing to take a Zoom call, or I'll appear at your office and so forth. I think that would tell you the path that person went on. Now, the path won't be the same. The path will be a little different because they did it at a different time. But I think that's really again, it's been there, done that kind of simple strategy, in my mind, really works pretty well. And then if you find someone, that person might just hire you right there. Mm-hmm. So now the other thing is to find someone who's kind of an internationalist. You can find some people that, but I must say, I've had a lot of contact with a lot of foreign students, and it's very difficult for me to place them. I've tried many times, and I haven't had great success.
Well, you've gone back to the importance of peace and people and partners and networks. So ending there, I wanted to thank you very much for your time. And like I said, your generosity with your stories and your lessons, and kind of bringing it all together for the students, giving them a lot of practical strategies to implement, and insights to think about. So appreciate that. We are out of time. But yeah, thank you very much. And
It goes quickly, then, and your
it
questions
does
are
go
always
quickly.
good. And I learn something every time I give a little conversation with you guys. I learn something about myself, and I learn things that I have to spend a little more time on. Well, thank you so much for having me, and it's fun.